Ethan Cole was not a man of high birth, came from a small village, raised among fields and quiet roads. His father worked the land, his mother cared for the home, and together they built a simple life. Ethan never thought he would one day stand inside a grand palace, let alone serve as a guard for a queen. Yet fate had a way of guiding lives in directions no one expected. He grew up with steady hands and a calm nature. People often said he was different, not because of great strength or speed, but because of his patience. While others rushed to speak, Ethan listened. While others hurried into trouble, he stood still and thought. This quiet strength became known to the local captain of the guard, who once visited the village. When the kingdom searched for new men to serve, Ethan's name was spoken, not by himself, but by neighbors who trusted him. When he first arrived at the palace, he felt like a stranger among the tall walls and shining halls. Many of the other guards came from noble families or had won battles in the army. They carried themselves with pride, their voices loud, their laughter filling the barracks. Ethan kept to himself, polishing his armor, checking his sword, and standing his watch without complaint. Some men mocked him, calling him too quiet, too plain, too simple to ever be noticed. He said nothing back, only kept his post. Queen Alara was young, but the crown already weighed heavy on her head. She watched the men who guarded her, not just for their skill with a blade, but for their hearts. She had grown weary of men who boasted of glory or chased titles. One evening, as she walked through the halls with her council, her eyes fell on Ethan. He did not look at her the way the others did. There was no hunger for reward in his gaze, only a steady focus on the duty before him, she noticed, even if he did not. Weeks passed, and Ethan continued his service. He rose before dawn, trained with care, and stood long hours without complaint. When others sought to be near the queen, he simply did his work. His life had been built on small duties: feeding animals, mending fences, watching the fields. Those same habits shaped him into a guard who never wavered. The queen from her throne began to see in him something rare. He was not driven by ambition. He was driven by loyalty. One night, a storm swept through the capital. Thunder shook the palace walls, and rain lashed against the windows. While many guards grumbled and sought cover in the archways, Ethan stood in the open courtyard, water soaking through his cloak. He did not move, even when lightning split the sky. Queen Alara, passing by with her attendants, saw him there. She paused at the window and asked why he remained when others had fled to shelter. The captain answered that Ethan would not leave his post as long as the queen's chamber lights still burned. She said nothing, but in her heart, respect began to grow. Though the queen never spoke to Ethan directly, she began to test him in small ways. She noticed if he would falter under long hours. She watched to see if he would bend under whispers and mockery. But he never did. His quiet nature, once overlooked, became a light in the dark halls of power. While others fought for attention, Ethan stood apart, his presence unshaken. He did not know it, but every day, the queen examined him. And with each day, she saw something more than just a guard. She saw a man who might hold a place in her story. Ethan Cole, the humble guard, never imagined his name would be remembered. He thought himself a shadow in the palace, a man among giants. But sometimes the quietest soul leaves the deepest mark. And though he did not yet know it, his life was about to change in ways greater than he could ever dream. The queen began to look more closely at Ethan Cole. She wanted to know if the quiet man who never spoke out of turn was as loyal as he seemed. Many men had stood at her side before, but most of them had been loud in their pride and eager for her notice. Ethan was different. He never asked for reward or praise, simply stood his post. But the queen was careful. She knew that even the calmest faces could hide ambition. So she decided to test him. Her first test was simple. One morning she asked him to carry a sealed letter to a distant town. It was not a message of war or politics, only a small note written to comfort a group of families who had lost their homes to fire. She gave no guard to ride with him, no banner to show his station. He was to travel as a simple man, deliver the note, and return without delay. She watched closely as he bowed his head and accepted the task without question. Ethan left at dawn with only his cloak and sword. The road was long, and heavy clouds followed him. Rain began to fall, turning the dirt to mud. His boots grew heavy, and the letter he carried had to be wrapped tight against the storm. Travelers he met along the way offered him rest and food, but he refused to stop until his duty was done. By nightfall he reached the town, his clothes soaked, his body weary, but the letter still dry in his hand. When the families read the queen's words, tears filled their eyes. The note held no promise of riches, only words of comfort, yet they said it meant more than gold. Ethan asked for nothing in return. He rested by their fire that night, then rose at first light to begin his journey back. The storm still raged, and the roads were worse, but he pressed forward. Each step was heavy, yet he thought only of his promise to the queen. He never once considered leaving the letter behind or turning back early. When he returned to the palace, his cloak torn and boots covered in mud, he walked straight to the queen. Without a word of complaint, he placed the sealed letter on her table. She opened it and found it untouched, safe as when she had given it. Ethan did not speak of the storm or the long miles. He simply said, "The message has been delivered, my queen." Then he bowed and returned to his post. Lara watched him go, her mind unsettled. Many men would have spoken of their hardship. They would have filled the hall with tales of storms and danger, hoping to earn her gratitude. Ethan said nothing. His silence told her more about his character than any boast could. He had done his duty not for praise, but because it was right. She began to see in him a strength that could not be trained or taught. It was the strength of a man who placed honor above himself. She tested him again in other ways. Sometimes she asked him to guard simple items, things no thief would care for, just to see if he treated small duties with the same care as great ones. Other times she placed him at posts where no one would see him, where the hours were long and lonely. Each time he stood his ground, never leaving early, never letting his focus fade. To Ethan, every duty was the same, whether grand or small. The queen watched him closely and wondered how such a man had gone unnoticed for so long. One evening, as she passed through the courtyard, she found Ethan standing watch under the cold night sky. Frost lay on the stones, and his breath came in clouds, yet he did not move from his place. She paused in the shadows, unseen by him, and studied his face. There was no pride, no hunger for reward. There was only calm focus, a steady fire in his eyes. She felt a stir of respect and perhaps something more. For the first time, she wondered if this humble guard might hold a greater place in her life than she had ever planned. Ethan Cole did not know he was being tested. He thought himself just another guard, doing the work set before him. But in the silent chambers of the palace, the queen was learning who he truly was. And with each test, her belief in him grew stronger. The simple man from a small village was slowly becoming more than just a guard. He was becoming part of her story, a story that was only beginning to unfold.
As time passed, the queen found herself speaking more often with Ethan Cole. At first, her words were few and simple. Small questions about his watch or the state of the gates, Ethan answered in short replies, always respectful, never bold. But soon, the queen began to share more than orders. She spoke of her worries, of the heavy crown she carried, of the long nights when she felt alone, even in the great halls of the palace. She did not know why she spoke so openly, only that his quiet eyes made her feel heard. Ethan listened without judgment. He never tried to flatter her or offer easy promises. Instead, he gave her honesty, even when his words were plain. When she doubted her choices, he told her that fear was not weakness, but a sign she cared for her people. When she feared betrayal, he told her that trust must be built slowly, not given too freely. His words were not polished like those of her counsel, but they carried a truth that touched her heart. In the long hours between duties, the queen would sometimes walk the gardens, where the lanterns glowed soft against the night. More than once, she found Ethan there, standing guard under the trees. She began to stop and speak with him. Their talks grew longer, and though he never crossed the line of respect, his voice carried warmth she had not known in years. She began to smile when she saw him, though she hid it from others. Whispers started to spread in the palace. Servants noticed the queen's lingering glances, the way she paused near Ethan's post. Guards muttered among themselves that the humble soldier was gaining the queen's favor. Some scoffed, saying a farmer's son could never matter to a ruler. Others grew jealous, their pride stung by his quiet rise. Ethan heard the whispers, but gave them no weight. His duty was the same, no matter what others said. He kept his focus on the queen's safety and nothing more. One evening, as the queen sat in her chamber, she called Ethan forward. She asked him if he ever felt anger at the way others spoke of him. He shook his head and answered that a man cannot control the tongues of others, only his own actions. She watched him closely and saw no bitterness in his eyes, only calm, strength. In that moment, she felt a pull in her heart stronger than before. This man, who asked for nothing, seemed to give her everything. She longed for truth, respect, and peace. As weeks turned into months, their bond deepened. When the queen walked through the grand halls, her eyes would search for him without thought. When he stood at her side during council meetings, she felt steadier, as though his presence gave her strength. Ethan, for his part, did not change. He was still the quiet guard, still the man who rose before dawn and took his watch without complaint. Yet inside, he too felt something stirring, though he never allowed it to show. He knew his place, and it was not to dream beyond it. Then came a night when the queen's burdens weighed heavier than ever. A dispute among lords threatened to tear the kingdom apart, and her council argued for hours without end. When the chamber finally emptied, she sat alone, her head bowed in exhaustion. Ethan remained at the door, silent as always. At last, she looked up and beckoned him closer. She told him of her fears, of the weight of ruling a land where trust was thin and betrayal common. Ethan knelt beside her, not as a subject before his queen, but as a man before a woman who carried too much alone. He told her that strength was not in standing without fear, but in standing even when fear was heavy. His words were simple, but they steadied her heart. In that quiet room, with no council to watch and no court to judge, the queen realized she had come to trust him more than any other. She felt a bond between them that was not born of rank or duty, but of truth and respect. Ethan Cole had entered her life as a guard, unnoticed and plain. Now, he had become the one she leaned on when the crown felt too heavy. Neither of them spoke of what lay in their hearts, but both knew their bond was unlike any other. And though they did not yet see the full path ahead, their story was only growing stronger with each passing day.
The night of the attack began like any other. The queen sat in her chamber reading by candlelight while the palace grew quiet. Guards walked their rounds, and the sound of the city outside faded into stillness. Ethan Cole stood at his post near her door, calm as always, his eyes sharp in the shadows. He thought the night would pass, as it always did, but fate had other plans. In the deepest part of the night, a sudden noise echoed through the hall. The sound of steel scraping against stone carried through the air. Ethan's hand moved to his sword as the queen looked up in alarm. Then shadows appeared at the far end of the corridor, moving swiftly, silent and deadly. Intruders had slipped past the outer guards. Their blades glimmered in the dim light, their eyes fixed on the queen's chamber. Without waiting for orders, Ethan stepped forward. He called for the alarm, his voice ringing clear through the halls. The attackers rushed, and steel clashed against steel. The fight was fierce, the sound of swords filling the night. Ethan met the first intruder head-on, his blade striking with precision. Though outnumbered, he did not falter. Each movement was steady, his body moving with the calm strength he had built over years of quiet duty. The queen watched from the doorway, her heart pounding. She had seen knights fight in tournaments, their moves grand and filled with show. Ethan's fighting was different. There was no flourish, no wasted motion. Each strike was simple, clean, and meant to end the threat. He fought not for glory, but for her life. More intruders poured into the hall, but Ethan stood like a wall before them, his eyes unshaken, his will unbroken. Blood stained the stones, and cries of battle rose. Servants awoke, and other guards came running, but Ethan held the line until they arrived. His arm was cut, his side bruised, yet he did not step back. When the last intruder fell, the hall fell silent once more, broken only by the queen's quick breaths and the drip of blood upon the floor. The captain of the guard arrived with men, shocked to see the scene. They found Ethan standing in the midst of it, his sword red but his posture straight. The queen hurried to him, her eyes wide with fear and relief. She asked if he was hurt, and he answered in his calm voice that it was nothing. But she saw the cut on his arm and the pain he tried to hide. For the first time, she reached for his hand, her fingers trembling against his rough skin. He bowed his head, But in that moment, she knew her trust in him had been right. In the days that followed, the palace buzzed with talk of the attack. Many praised Ethan, yet he never spoke of his deeds. He stood at his post as if nothing had changed. But for the queen, everything had changed. She could not forget the way he had fought without fear, the way he had placed himself between her and death. She had seen knights with titles shrink from danger, but this humble man from a village had faced it without hesitation. Late one evening, when the palace was quiet again, the queen called Ethan to her chamber. She told him that her crown meant nothing without the lives of her people, and that he had saved not only her life, but the future of the kingdom. Ethan bowed and said he had only done his duty. She looked at him and replied that duty alone could not explain the courage she had seen. For a long moment they stood in silence, the weight of unspoken words between them. In her heart, the queen knew she would never see him as just a guard again. He had become her protector in more than name. He had become the man she trusted above all others. And though neither of them spoke it aloud, both felt that their lives were now tied together, bound by the night when he had stood alone against the darkness. Their bond, once quiet and hidden, had revealed itself in fire and steel, and it would not be broken. Years passed after the night of the attack, and the kingdom slowly grew stronger under the rule of Queen Alara. Her people came to love her not only for her wisdom, but also for her kindness. She walked among them often, listening to their worries, sharing in their joys, and standing beside them in their sorrows. Wherever she went, Ethan Cole was never far behind. He was no longer seen by the people as just a guard. He had become a symbol of loyalty, a man who had stood against the darkness when others faltered. Though he never sought praise, his story spread across towns and villages. Children whispered his name in play, pretending to be the humble guard who saved the queen. Mothers told their sons and daughters that greatness was not found in titles or crowns, but in hearts that chose honor. And still, Ethan walked quietly through the palace halls, carrying himself as he always had, simple and steady, as if none of the stories were about him. The queen, however, could never see him as she once did. Each day that passed only deepened her trust in him. When disputes among her council grew heated, she felt calm when he stood nearby. When she faced decisions that weighed heavily on her, she found herself looking to him for strength. His silence gave her courage, and his honesty gave her peace. He was her protector, but more than that, he was her anchor. Many lords of the land noticed the closeness between them. Some grumbled that a farmer's son had no place beside a queen. Others tried to win her favor, offering alliances and wealth. Ouch. But she listened to none of them. Her eyes returned always to Ethan, the man who had asked for nothing yet given everything. She knew that power could be bought, titles could be claimed, but loyalty such as his could not be forced. It was freely given, and in that gift, she saw a treasure beyond measure. One summer evening, as the sun set over the palace gardens, the queen walked alone with Ethan. The air was warm, and the sky burned with colors of gold and red. She told him that her reign would one day end, as all reigns do, but she wanted her people to remember not only her name, but the legacy of those who had stood beside her. She spoke of him, of his courage and humility, of how his story had already taken root in the hearts of the people. Ethan lowered his head, saying he had only done his duty. But she touched his arm and told him that duty alone could not explain the bond they shared. He said nothing. 4 words often failed him, but in his silence, she saw more than he could ever say. It was the same silence that had once made her curious, then comforted her, and finally bound her to him. The queen knew that whatever history remembered, her heart would always carry his name. In the years that followed, their bond never weakened. Ethan continued to serve with the same humble strength, guarding her not only from threats, but from the loneliness of power. And when at last his hair turned gray and his steps grew slower, the queen still kept him near. The people loved the sight of their ruler, walking side by side with the man who had once been just a guard, but had become so much more. When the queen passed, her reign remembered as a time of peace and honor, the people did not speak of her alone. They spoke of the guard who had stood by her side through every trial, who had given his life to loyalty without asking for reward. His name, Ethan Cole, was carved into the stones of the palace, not as a knight, not as a noble, but as the humble man who had become part of the human legacy. And so the story lived on, told and retold, that greatness does not always wear a crown. Sometimes it stands quietly in the shadows, watching, waiting, and protecting, until history itself remembers.